In my first tacking tutorial, I shared the easiest technique I'd found to help you make your first fully foiling tacks. Thus, I had you start by going across the wind on a reach, which gives you more speed to take into your turn. Once you've mastered that to some degree at least, the natural progression is to start your tack when you're heading higher into the wind, or even as close to the wind as possible. This is much more difficult because everything must happen much quicker. These 4 tips and the description of the quick tack itself will help you master your tacking from any heading. Each of these tips could be used separately to enhance your tacking technique, especially if it's the same or similar to the one that I shared in my first tacking video. The first 4 chapters detail tips for setting up for a successful tack. The final chapter details the quick tack itself, which uses the same principles I shared in my first video on steroids. I recommend using this as your tack technique, but most of the tips will be helpful for other techniques as well. The tips are presented in the order you would use them prior to throwing the tack itself. So do them in that order when you are practicing more than one. Each chapter stands alone, complete with everything you need to get started with your practice. You could attempt to learn the tips and techniques from any number of the chapters before heading to the water, from one at a time to all 5. Once you've decided your strategy, you can use the chapter links to return to the tip or tips you are working on to review them just before you start your practice session. You can watch this and all my videos ad-free on Patreon. You'll have exclusive access to improved versions of some of my most important popular videos. Please consider showing your gratitude for the dozens of hours it takes me to make each major new video. And now you can take advantage of a free trial. Watch all my videos ad-free for 7 days with no obligation to continue. Prerequisite skills and videos from which to learn them. In creating this tutorial, I'm making certain assumptions about your skill levels. I assume you can do at least some fully foiling tacks, perhaps when starting from going across the wind on a beam reach, which is easiest. You just want to improve from there and get more consistent. I also assume you know how to control the speed of your foil board, make tight, fast S-turns, and can glide well. You can learn how to practice each of these skills by watching my previous videos. I recommend you revisit these exercises, regardless of your skill level, prior to practicing the quick tack. It will hone the skills that are critical to success. Run through those 3 exercises, doing each of them 2 to 3 times. It will only take 20 to 30 minutes, provide a great warm-up for your body, and boost your confidence. Tip 1. Adjust your front hand position to control the speed of your wing switch. This is the technique that I found most recently, and it's one of the most effective. It could be difficult on wings with loop handles. Please let us know in the comments if you try this with them. Move your front hand back somewhat. The optimal placement depends on how fast you need the wing to transition to the new side. The higher into the wind you start your tack, the faster your wing must switch. Throwing the wing from a position closer to its center of lift causes it to rotate more quickly. You may feel the need to use more force. The optimal hand position will be different for each of your wings, with more distance between your hands required for your larger ones. The further back your old front hand is, the more your wing will pull in the new direction prior to completing your hand switch. By holding closer to the center of the wing's pull, the force needed to angle the wing and power it up is reduced. Just the weight of the wing gets this started, before your new backhand is even able to help. This gets your foil board yawing quicker, and you'll have more time to finish switching your hands. If you are starting your tack from a lower heading, with sufficient speed to make a wider turn into the wind, hold your front hand at the front of the wing. This allows your wing to remain more horizontal over your head as you carve into the wind. If you move your hand back too much, your wing will actually switch to the new side too quickly relative to the arc of your foil board's turn. I highly recommend experimenting with front hand placement using this run-with-it land practice technique. Once your hands are positioned, do tip 2 or throw your tack. Tip 2. Mini foil pumping to gain altitude. It's helpful to start with as much altitude as you can. You could shift your weight and wing angle to gain altitude, but I find the mini foil pump is easier to control without breaching. Bend and straighten both legs in a fairly quick rhythm. If you're flying fairly low when you start, make slightly bigger and more vigorous pumps. As your foil gets closer to the surface of the water, make them smaller and weaker. Doing a few pumps before tacking warms up your legs to the possibility of pumping during your tack too, if needed to stay on the foil. When you are as high as you are comfortable flying, do tip 3 or go ahead and throw your tack. Tip 3. Pre-angle your foil board upwind. Normally, it's best to use your back ankle to keep your foil mast aligned, so it's pointing directly towards your center. So normally, you should feel even pressure between your feet and across your back foot from heel to toes. Just prior to throwing your tack, use your back ankle to angle your board into the wind slightly while maintaining a straight course. For example, if you're riding heel side, bend your back ankle up until you feel more pressure on your toes than your heel. To keep the foil board from turning upwind despite this angle change, bend your front leg and straighten your back a bit to move your wing slightly forward. Pre-angling your foil board causes it to turn up into the wind more quickly than it would have when you throw your tack. This is good because the radius of your foil's turn must be smaller than that of your center of gravity and wing, so you need your board to turn quite fast. The faster it turns, the harder you can throw your wing switch, and the closer to the wind you can start your tack. When you feel the angle has been set, do tip 4 or throw your tack. Tip 4. Bring your wings center strut to head height. When you are powered up to go as fast as you can, your wing tip will be low and your center strut will be mostly parallel to the water. Especially with smaller wings, the center of your wing will be at shoulder height. To make the final preparation for your tack, raise both arms up, pivoting at the shoulders, until your center strut is just above head height. Be sure to maintain power with your bent back arm. The wing's power will be directed slightly more upward, but you should feel as much pull in your arms as you did prior to raising your arms. Your wing can be rotated over your head more quickly and efficiently from this higher position. If you throw from the lower position, the required upward initial arc of your wing catches the wind more, slowing your rotation and lifting you up. Of course it can work, but only if you have enough speed relative to the wind to still make it around the turn and you started low enough to not breach. Once your wing is in the new higher position, throw your quick tack. Throwing your quick tack. Check to be sure each of the tips you are currently practicing are still set. If not, fix them. For example, if you have lost altitude, you can do a couple more mini pumps while maintaining the stance preparations of the other tips. The suggested order in which I've presented them is efficient, but not required to make them work, as you probably realize. Start practicing your quick tacks from a heading slightly higher into the wind than your normal direction when you usually succeed in the current conditions. Once you can tack fairly reliably from that heading, start from a bit higher, and so on. High speed is important to success, so get going fast before you initiate your tack. If conditions and your equipment hinder your speed at one heading, bear off the wind a bit to speed up. You can make this counter turn just before your tack, holding it just long enough to gain speed so you don't lose much ground upwind. Just before throwing your tack, visualize what must happen. Your wing will rotate up through a horizontal position as it transitions from the old to the new direction. The lower wing tip becomes the upper one somewhat before the board passes through the eye of the wind. Your wing's transition leads and helps drive your foil board's turn. Discern from your heading just how fast these must happen and adjust the position of your front hand on the boom or front handle accordingly. Your foil board must make a smaller radius turn than your wing, tightening even more as it yaws away from the wind at the end, and your body directs and balances between them. This visualization only takes a moment before you make it happen. Bend your front arm sharply to bring your front hand upwind of and slightly above your head. Shift your gaze to the upwind horizon. For a heel to toe tack, twist your body into the wind as you bend your front arm. Your back hand continues to grip the wing to help initiate the throw. Your back arm provides a dynamic pivot point. As soon as you feel your wing is rotating smartly enough, release your back hand and bring it to the front. As soon as it takes over as the front hand, move your other hand into position at the back and start pulling your wing towards you to power up in the new direction. The key word here is fast. Each subsequent move comes immediately on the heels of the previous one, except for those that can be done simultaneously, such as shifting your gaze and twisting your body. Using mini pumps to start your tack high warms you up to the possibility of pumping through your turn, as needed. With practice, it will allow you to tack with less foil board speed and still remain on the foil. This additional challenge is probably best left for after you can do the quick tack without it. Pumping at the end of the turn when needed is the logical place to start. Land practice to gain muscle memory for wing handling. If you have the space, do the run with it style of land practice. Place a low object on the ground around which to make your turn, or even better, set up a rope to define the arc of your tack to run around. Stand downwind of it so the heading you will be running duplicates the heading you will be practicing on the water that day. I'm practicing from an angle that is as high as I can wing into the wind in these examples, or about a 45-degree angle to the wind. Experiment with your front hand at the front of the wing when starting on a heading across the wind. Then move your front hand back to feel the difference as you try making a sharper turn. Ideally, do your land practice when the wind is strong enough to lean into it somewhat as you run. Then when you throw your tack, you will get the feeling of reacting with your body and how your feet must run a tight enough circle to remain on your feet. I believe the run with it style of land practice is more beneficial than remaining stationary. It gives you a feel for the flight path of your wing as you run through your transition. If your wing has handles or loops, practice your wing handling on land until you can successfully switch your hands without looking. The required distance between your hands must be in your muscle memory. You could also look back, but it will make it more difficult to keep your balance and get your timing right. Experiment. This challenge of the move is not one I'm familiar with, as I always use a wing with a boom, so any place I bring my new backhand affords me the ability to hook or grab and immediately power the wing in the new direction. A possible compromise would be to start with your eyes on the upwind horizon and then turn your gaze back for the grab at the end, but there is little time. Please share in the comments anything that will help other viewers with handles or loops. Why this technique works. We have seen how tacking through only 90 degrees is the most challenging goal. In other words, tacking when you are trying to wing upwind as fast as possible. It's helpful to break down transitions into 3 flight paths. That of the foil, your weight, and the wing. Your job is to coordinate all 3. In order to turn quickly through the eye of the wind, your foil must bank into the turn, as described in tip 3. I'm exaggerating the angles with this model to illustrate. Because you will lose speed, your board will usually need to turn until it's heading across the wind in the new direction. This will make it easier to regain the speed needed to stay on the foil. The foil will start high in the water as described in tip 2 and lose altitude until it is heading across the wind in the new direction, where it will level out and start to regain altitude again. Then you can turn back upwind to complete your turn. Thus your board will go on an S-shaped flight path. The flight path of your weight is also 2 linked turns, each with a smaller radius than that of your foil board. Your weight must shift into the turn and forward as you throw your tack. This counters the centrifugal force generated and starts your foil on its slow downward glide. It also counters the wind drag forces on the wing as you flag it out to transition it to the new direction, so it's simplest to think of shifting your weight into the wind. As your foil board completes the first half of its S turn and is going across the wind, it will pass under you to place your weight upwind of it again. This allows you to power up the wing in the new direction and start turning your foil board back upwind to complete the second half of its S-turn. Because keeping the wing as vertical as possible maximizes your speed, the flight path of the wing is the most dramatic of the three. Not only will its orientation change the most, it also must lead the system and transition the fastest to complete its slightly longer flight path in the same amount of time as the other two. The flight path of your wing enables your weight shift, which in turn carves your foil board. By throwing your wing at the correct angle into the wind, you will shift your weight forward on the board to start its downward glide, and to the side to carve your turn as your wing is depowered. Powering up in the new direction as soon as possible minimizes the need to turn your foil board away from the wind onto a reach. To the degree that is needed, holding your wing forward on the foil board causes it to yaw away from the wind quickly. As your board regains speed and altitude, you can bring your wing into the normal powered-up position as you turn back into the wind. Conclusion, credits, and blooper. When you can nail most of your tacks from a heading that is as close to the wind as you can wing, you are a true master of the tack, at least on flat water or small wind chop. I find tacking in bigger chop and swell that much more difficult. Technique tips for that are beyond the scope of this video, mainly because I'm still making my tacks reliably in those conditions. The narrations for this video were generated by an AI clone of my voice on 11labs.io. This saves me some time in an otherwise very lengthy process. I hope these tips help you to hone your quick tack as much as they have helped me. Thanks for watching.